2022 is the year South Africans were confronted with the stark reality and dangers of climate change. The KwaZulu-Natal flooding in April last year was one of the most devastating examples. And the threat of more extreme weather exacerbates what we were discussing a short while ago. The fact that South Africa's infrastructure is crumbling and roads and bridges in disrepair can be further damaged by rains and flooding. To discuss, we're now joined by Climate Justice Coalition Secretary, Dr. Alex Lenferna. Doctor, thank you for being with us. Last year, over 400 people lost their lives in flooding in KwaZulu-Natal. Do you think South Africa will wake up to the dangers or bury our heads again? It seems like there is a helplessness because there's not money to fix the infrastructure in the first place, and never mind do it in a very green way.
Evening, it's a pleasure to be with you. I think it's a real wake-up call that South Africa is getting, whether it's the floods in KZN, the droughts in the Eastern Cape, even the heavy rains that we've seen in Gauteng over this December period, where we saw repeated flooding. The devastating reality of the climate crisis is with South Africa. And so when we think about what it means to build resilience to the impacts of climate change, you need basic service delivery at first, right? But then you need to be investing in more resilient infrastructure that can deal with this extreme climate regime that South Africa is moving into. And so I think, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in fixing, municipal governance to get it to basic levels, never mind the sort of extreme preparations and adaptations that are going to be required for climate change. And so we do really need to see a major shift in how South Africa deals with the climate crisis. At the national level, there's a lot of, fine rhetoric that comes, but when it comes to on-the-ground service delivery, when it comes to on-the-ground delivery of climate resilience, we're seeing from KwaZulu-Natal to the Eastern Cape to Gauteng across the country that our governments just aren't adequately ready for the impacts of the climate crisis.
And there are legal moves afoot. And I want to talk about those, the climate change bill and cabinet approving a move to a just transition. But is it all about getting the basics right first? Like you say, South Africa is in a quandary because Eskom is trying to keep the lights on. It's using diesel and coal, and that's responsible for transmission. Until we sort out Eskom, can we even think about going much greener?
Yeah, I think Eskom's crisis is certainly one of the most central ones facing South Africa, both in terms of the energy, but also the climate crisis. I think in some ways we are relatively fortunate in that the solution to both lies predominantly with investing in renewable energy in the form of solar or wind or battery, because these are some of the fastest ways that we can bring new energy online. And we really need new energy online because South Africa faces an energy supply shortage, right? We don't have enough energy. So the quickest way we can bring new energy online is through renewables. And then that can give us more space, the space that we need to do maintenance on our coal fleets so that they can run properly. We've seen their energy availability factor decrease rapidly, right? And that's because these are old, unreliable coal fleets which haven't been properly maintained. And so we need to urgently invest in renewables to tackle the energy crisis and also to help bring energy costs down, because what we see is new coal or gas or nuclear are all prohibitively expensive compared to renewables, which are fortunately the most affordable and also the most job-creating new energy solutions, which would most rapidly address load shedding. So I think here we can have a win-win if we actually invest in renewables. But the problem is we have the likes of Minister Mantashe sitting in the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, who has dragged his feet on allowing new renewables, has gone incredibly slowly, and has really been a bit of a disaster in his position, not allowing us to bring on the needed amounts of new generation that would help bring us out of this crisis. And so we can expect the energy crisis to deepen over the next few years, thanks to largely the government's failures to invest in new generation.
However, many would say, even Eskom itself and some who are pro-renewable energy, that we can't rely on renewable energy alone because it doesn't offer that consistent supply that is quantifiable, that helps planning, the so-called base load. So what do you do in a situation like that? Will climate change activists accept maybe even building new coal stations while we go green in other areas, or looking at nuclear. What's the solution? Because it needs to come soon.
Well, the thing is, South Africa has a massive coal fleet already. We are one of the most coal-dependent countries on earth. So we have a very large baseload already. We're so far from the renewables variability argument having any purchase. That's only when you get much further in with much higher level of renewable energy that you have to worry a lot more about that variability of renewables. And fortunately, what we are seeing is that countries with much higher renewable energy penetration are able to deliver on the stable, reliable energy through the use of things like storage, better transmission. So investments in that is key to supplementing investments in solar and wind as South Africa moves to a more renewable energy strong mix in the energy system. But the thing is, we're so far from that as South Africa, and the supposed baseload that we have, coal, is even more unreliable than a renewable energy system. I mean, the reason why we're stuck in this mess of not having reliable energy is because the supposed baseload that's supposed to be coal is breaking down. And so if you go to energy experts like the Center for Scientific and Industrial Research, they'll tell you that actually a more reliable system that's able to reliably deliver, both that sort of base load, but also just generally cheaper, more reliable and affordable power is one that's dominated by renewable energy. And so the experts on the energy side, and this is not climate activists, these are just the energy experts, will tell you that that renewable energy system is in fact better. And that South Africa, as one of the most coal-dependent countries, needs to rapidly make that transition, both for its own energy reliability and affordability, but also to tackle the climate crisis.
We haven't even spoken about the quality of air. So last year, a High Court ruled that the poor quality in the Highveld area is unconstitutional. It's actually cutting our lives short. If you live in parts of Gauteng or in Mpumalanga, where Secunda is, a very difficult situation when Eskom is saying, look, if we comply with your standards, we're going to see a huge increase in load shedding. So there is this sense of helplessness, possibly for years to come. Do you agree?
Yeah, so I think Eskom is caught between a bit of a rock and a hard place in that regard. And we had a meeting with the outgoing Eskom CEO last year where he presented the sort of plan to try to deal with those minimum emission standards. And the way that he presented it was that in order to try and cope, they needed to ramp up their investments in renewables and maybe delay the retirement of coal by a few years, because the investing in technologies to make coal slightly cleaner but still very polluting would be prohibitively expensive. So they kind of faced that dilemma that they're caught between. And I mean, that dilemma is partly due to the fact that the government also in past decades has failed to invest in alternative generation, which would have allowed Eskom to, make the transition and not to have to rely on these polluting plants. And so the longer we delay the transition, the more we'll be stuck in this particular dilemma for Eskom. And so I think this year is going to be very interesting to see, because Eskom has put in an application to try appeal the ruling around the minimum emission standards to get delays on when they transition those renewables. But that's a trade-off as well, because you're also exposing people to more air pollution for longer periods. And so the figures show that thousands of people are prematurely dying every year as a result of that air pollution. I myself have a 10-year-old in my life who has asthma. We live in Gauteng, and the air pollution is having devastating health impacts on people's lives. And so, I think we need to urgently get our government moving in the right direction so that we're not stuck with this same devastating air quality, as well as water pollution and the soil pollution that comes with it.
Yeah, so this is just one of the quandaries. It's very difficult, and I'd love to end on another one of the big debates. I mean, 2022 was maybe a year of victory for activists. Shell was blocked from carrying out that seismic survey in the Wild Coast. It didn't adequately consult with the communities. But the minister you mentioned, Gwede Mantashe, is adamant that we need oil and gas exploration. And those who are for it would say, I mean, this is a chance to lift millions of South Africans out of poverty. We have to to take it?
So I think that's a lovely industry talking point that they say this is going to be a massive job creator and lift millions out of poverty. But if you look at the reality on the ground to some of our African neighbors, when oil and gas exploration comes to town, it doesn't lift people out of poverty. Mozambique, just next door, they did oil and gas exploration there. The studies show that, in fact, deepened poverty, and it has created incredible conflict and violence in that area. Same for Nigeria. What we see there is some of the areas where oil and gas were explored by Shell is a toxic legacy of pollution, of violence, of poverty. And so the oil and gas companies will always come selling these promises of jobs and wealth to local communities. But the real people that end up benefiting are the rich multinational gas corporations that like to trample on the rights of local communities. And so when we think about what is the most job-creating energy future for South Africa, the evidence is clear. If we invest in locally produced, socially owned renewable energy in South Africa, that is where the job creation is. That is where we have vast potential for economic beneficiation. It is where we have vast potential to really employ the people of South Africa in an industry that can not only be more sustainable environmentally, but that can actually put them to work in building a better future for South Africa and creating a more just energy system that doesn't sacrifice communities in order to benefit multinational corporations. So I think Minister Mantashe, unfortunately, even the courts ruled that he was so biased in favor of these oil and gas corporations that he is not a neutral arbiter that communities even need to consult with anymore. So I think we've got to face the fact that the ANC and Minister Mantashe in particular are bought and sold by these corporations that they're supposed to be regulating and are driving us down the wrong path when it comes to our energy system.
All right, thank you for your time this late afternoon. Dr. Alex Lenferna, Climate Justice Coalition Secretary.